The ship from Earth drifted slowly toward the massive space station called Valanthos Prime, and inside that ship, Ambassador Kira Okonkwo pressed her face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. She had trained for this moment for 3 years, learned 7 alien languages, and memorized the customs of 12 different species. But nothing could have prepared her for the sight. Before her eyes, Valanthos Prime was not just a station. It was a city floating in the darkness of space, with towers of crystal and metal stretching in every direction, and lights of blue and gold flickering across its surface like stars brought down from the sky. "Ambassador, we are beginning docking procedures," said Captain Torres from behind her, and Kira nodded without turning away from the window. This was humanity's first official visit to the Galactic Council, and everything depended on making a good impression. The docking bay was enormous, large enough to hold 50 ships the size of theirs, and when the airlock opened, Kira stepped out with her team of 6 humans behind her. They wore their best diplomatic uniforms, dark blue with silver trim, and they walked with their backs straight and their heads held high. But the moment they entered the main corridor, Kira felt something strange. The gravity was wrong. It felt like she was walking on the moon, each step too light, each movement too easy, and she had to focus hard just to keep from bouncing with every stride. Her team noticed it too, and she saw Sergeant Marcus Webb frown as he adjusted his pace. The station's gravity was barely 40% of what they were used to on Earth, and it made them feel like they might float away at any moment. A group of aliens waited for them at the end of the corridor, and Kira studied them as she approached. There were 3 different species present, each one stranger than the last. The tallest was Delegate Visitheren, an insectoid creature with 4 arms and large compound eyes that reflected the light like broken mirrors. His body was thin, almost skeletal, covered in a hard shell the color of dried blood. Beside him stood a Kaveth, a being that looked like a mix between a bird and a lizard, with feathers of deep purple and scales running down its long neck. The third was a Valanthi, the species that had built this station, a creature of flowing silver skin that seemed to shift and change with every breath. "Welcome to Valanthos Prime," said Visitheren, his voice clicking and buzzing through a translator device on his chest. "We are honored to receive the representatives of Earth." Kira bowed her head in the traditional greeting she had learned, and replied in the alien's own language, though her pronunciation was far from perfect. "The honor is ours, Delegate Visitheren, and we thank the Council for this opportunity." The aliens seemed surprised that she had bothered to learn their words, and for a moment, Kira thought she saw something like approval in their strange eyes. But then she noticed something else. They were staring at her team with expressions she could not quite read. The Kaveth tilted its head to one side, studying Marcus Webb with obvious curiosity, and the Valanthi kept its distance as if afraid to get too close. Visitheren led them through the station toward the council chambers, and along the way, Kira observed how the other aliens reacted to their presence. Some stopped in the corridors to watch them pass, whispering to each other in languages she did not know. Others moved out of their way quickly, pressing themselves against the walls as if the humans might accidentally crush them. A small creature with 6 legs and fur the color of sunset actually ran away when Marcus smiled at it. "They think we are fragile," whispered Dr. Chen, the team's scientist, walking beside Kira with a puzzled look on her face. "What do you mean?" asked Kira. Dr. Chen gestured at the aliens around them. "Look at how carefully they move near us. Like we might break if they touch us, and listen to how softly they speak, as if loud noises would hurt our ears." Kira realized she was right. The aliens were treating them like they were made of glass. Later that day, after hours of formal introductions and ceremonial speeches, Kira found herself alone in the observation deck with Visitheren. The delegate stood beside her, looking out at the stars, and his 4 arms were folded behind his back in what she had learned was a gesture of relaxation. "I must confess something to you, Ambassador Okonkwo," he said, his translator buzzing with each word. "Please speak freely," said Kira. "When we first received your species transmission, we were curious about you, but when we saw images of your kind, many of us were not impressed." Kira kept her face calm, though she felt a spark of irritation in her chest. "May I ask why?" "You have no natural armor," said Visitheren, gesturing at her skin with one of his thin arms. "No claws or fangs or venom, no bioluminescence for communication, no extra limbs for manipulation, and your bodies appear soft and easily damaged." He paused, and his compound eyes turned to look at her directly. "Some members of the council wondered how your species survived long enough to develop space travel at all." Kira thought about this for a long moment before answering. "We survived because we had to," she said simply. "Our world did not make it easy for us." Vistheren made a sound that might have been laughter, though she could not be sure. "Every species says such things, Ambassador. But I have seen the data on your planet, and by our standards, it seems quite ordinary." Kira smiled, but said nothing. She knew the aliens had only seen basic information about Earth, the kind of data that fit into a report, numbers about size and distance from the sun and chemical composition of the atmosphere. They had not seen the hurricanes that could flatten cities. They had not seen the earthquakes that could split the ground open like a wound. They had not seen the volcanoes, or the tsunamis, or the predators that had hunted humanity's ancestors across the plains of Africa. And most importantly, they had not felt Earth's gravity. In the light gravity of this station, Kira felt like she could jump over buildings, and every muscle in her body felt like it was barely working at all. She wondered what these aliens would feel if they ever stood on the surface of Earth, where the weight of the world pressed down on every living thing without mercy. But that was a question for another day. For now, she would let them believe what they wanted to believe. She would let them see humans as soft and fragile and weak. And when the time came, when they finally understood the truth, she hoped they would remember this moment and realize that she had tried to warn them in her own quiet way. "Perhaps you are right, Delegate," she said, looking out at the stars with a small smile on her face. "Perhaps we are just ordinary creatures from an ordinary world." But deep in her heart, Kira knew better, and soon the rest of the galaxy would know it too. 3 weeks had passed since the humans arrived at Valanthos Prime, and in that time, they had become something of a curiosity among the station's many inhabitants. Aliens would often stop to watch them walk through the corridors, whispering to each other about how strange these new creatures looked, with their flat faces and their soft skin, and their odd habit of showing their teeth when they were happy. Kira had grown used to the stares, and she had learned to ignore the comments she sometimes overheard through her translator. Today she was walking through the market district with Sergeant Marcus Webb and Dr. Chen, exploring the countless shops and stalls that sold goods from 100 different worlds. The market was a massive open space in the center of the station, with a ceiling so high that clouds actually formed near the top, and the air was filled with sounds and smells that no human had ever experienced before. Marcus was looking at a display of alien weapons, his soldiers' eyes studying each one with professional interest, while Dr. Chen was deep in conversation with a merchant about the chemical composition of a strange purple fruit. Kira was about to call them to move on when she heard it. A sound like thunder, a sound like the world breaking apart. She turned just in time to see the ceiling on the far side of the market begin to fall. A support beam, massive and ancient, had finally given way after decades of tiny cracks spreading through its metal bones, and now it was coming down, bringing tons of crystal and steel with it. The noise was terrible, a roaring crash that seemed to go on forever, and when it finally stopped, A cloud of dust filled the air so thick that Kira could barely see her own hands. Then came the screaming. Hundreds of aliens had been caught beneath the falling debris, trapped under broken metal and shattered crystal, and their cries of pain and fear filled the market like a wave of pure misery. Emergency alarms began to wail throughout the station, and Kira could hear announcements in a dozen languages calling for rescue teams and medical support. But the rescue teams were far away, and the injured were dying now. "Marcus," said Kira, and her voice was calm even though her heart was pounding in her chest. The sergeant was already moving, his eyes fixed on the disaster site with an expression she had never seen before. "I know, Ambassador. Permission to assist?" "Go," she said. Marcus ran toward the collapse, and Kira watched him disappear into the dust cloud with Dr. Chen right behind him. She followed as fast as she could, pushing through the crowd of panicking aliens who were running in the opposite direction. When she reached the edge of the debris field, she stopped and stared. The destruction was worse than she had imagined. Huge pieces of metal lay scattered across the ground like the bones of some giant beast, and beneath them she could see movement, arms and legs and tentacles reaching out from the gaps, begging for help. A group of alien rescue workers had already arrived, but they were standing at the edge of the wreckage with expressions of despair on their faces. Their equipment had not arrived yet, and without it, they could not move the heavy debris. One of them, a Kaveth with feathers stained gray by dust, was shouting into a communication device. "We need heavy lifters now. The debris is too heavy for us to move by hand. There are survivors, but we cannot reach them." That was when Marcus Webb walked past them. The Kaveth stopped talking and watched in confusion as this human, this soft and fragile creature, stepped into the debris field and wrapped his hands around a piece of metal beam that must have weighed 500 kilograms. And then he lifted it. The Kaveth's beak fell open. Marcus raised the beam above his head and threw it to the side like it was nothing. And beneath it, a small alien child lay curled in a ball, shaking but alive. "Get her out of here," Marcus called to the rescue workers, and then he moved on to the next piece of wreckage. Dr. Chen was working beside him now. And even though she was a scientist and not a soldier, she was lifting debris that the aliens could not budge, pulling trapped survivors free with her bare hands. Kira joined them, and together the three humans tore through the wreckage like it was made of paper. The aliens watched in stunned silence. One of the rescue workers, a Valanthe with silver skin that had turned pale with shock, tried to help Marcus lift a large piece of crystal that had pinned down an elderly alien merchant. The Valanthe pulled with all its strength, but the crystal did not move at all. Then Marcus grabbed it with one hand and lifted it off the merchant like he was picking up a book from a table. "How?" whispered the Valanthe. "How is this possible?" But there was no time to answer questions. More survivors were calling for help, and the humans kept working, moving from one trapped alien to the next, never stopping to rest, never slowing down. The hardest moment came when they reached a group of aliens trapped beneath a collapsed pillar, a massive column of metal that had fallen across a row of market stalls. At least 20 survivors were pinned beneath it, and the pillar was too heavy and too long for even the humans to lift and throw aside. But they could not leave those people to die. "I will hold it up," said Marcus. And before anyone could argue, he crouched beneath the pillar and pushed upward with his legs and his back and every muscle in his body. The pillar rose. Not much, just enough to create a gap beneath it. But it was enough. "Get them out!" Marcus shouted through gritted teeth. "Get them out now!" The rescue workers rushed forward, pulling the trapped aliens free one by one. And Marcus held that pillar for what felt like an eternity. Sweat poured down his face. His arms shook. His legs trembled. Every vein in his neck stood out like a rope beneath his skin. But he did not let go. When the last survivor was pulled free, Marcus finally released the pillar and fell to his knees, gasping for air, his entire body shaking with exhaustion. A Kaveth healer who had been watching the whole thing walked slowly toward him, its eyes wide with something that looked very much like fear. "What are you?" the healer asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "We were told your species was fragile. We were told you were weak. But I have never seen anything like what you just did." Marcus looked up at the alien, and despite his exhaustion, he managed a small smile. "We are human," he said simply. "We are from Earth." The healer looked at him for a long moment, then looked at Kira and Dr. Chen, who were helping the injured aliens toward the medical teams that had finally arrived. "Earth," the healer repeated, as if the word itself held some terrible secret. "We must learn more about this place you call Earth." And from that moment on, nothing on Valanthos Prime would ever be the same. 2 days after the market collapse, the Galactic Council called an emergency assembly, but this meeting was not about the disaster. It was about the humans' representatives from 37 different species filled the great circular chamber, sitting in rising rows of seats that surrounded a central platform where speakers could address the entire assembly. The chamber was designed to hold thousands, but today only the most important officials had been summoned, the scientists and military leaders and heads of state who made the decisions that shaped the galaxy. Kira Okonkwo sat in the human section with her team, a small group of 6 in a sea of alien faces, and she could feel every eye in the room turning toward them again and again. They were no longer being looked at with curiosity or amusement. Now the looks were different. Now there was confusion and fear, and something that might have been respect. Delegate Vises Theron stood at the central platform, his 4 arms clasped behind his back, his compound eyes sweeping across the assembly with an expression that Kira could not read. "I have called this assembly," he began, his translator buzzing with each word, "to discuss a matter of great importance to every species in this chamber." He paused and looked directly at Kira. 2 days ago, during the tragedy in the market district, we witnessed something that defied everything we believed about our new allies from the planet called Earth. A murmur ran through the chamber, and Kira saw aliens leaning toward each other, whispering questions and theories. "We saw humans lift weights that should have been impossible for creatures of their size," Vis Theron continued. "We saw them perform feats of strength that rival our most powerful species, and we saw them do this without armor, without mechanical assistance, using nothing but their own bodies." He gestured to a group of scientists sitting in the front row. "I have asked our leading researchers to present their findings on the planet Earth and its inhabitants, and I warn you now that what you are about to hear will change how you see the galaxy." A Valanthi scientist rose from its seat and moved to the platform, its silver skin rippling with nervous energy. It activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with a rotating image of a blue and green planet. "This is Earth," the scientist said. "The 3rd planet from a yellow star in a remote arm of the galaxy, home to the species called humans." The image zoomed in, showing continents and oceans and swirling white clouds. "When we first surveyed this world, we classified it as a standard habitable planet, suitable for carbon-based life but otherwise unremarkable." The scientist paused and looked out at the assembly with an expression of deep unease. "We were wrong." Numbers and data began to appear around the image of Earth, and as Kira watched, she saw the aliens in the chamber begin to react with growing alarm. "Earth's gravity is 2.5 times the galactic average for inhabited worlds," the scientist said. "This means that every creature on Earth lives under a weight that would crush most of the species in this chamber." Gasps echoed through the assembly. The planet's atmosphere is dense and contains an unusually high concentration of oxygen, a highly reactive gas that most species find toxic in such quantities, but humans breathe it constantly without harm. More gasps, and Kira heard someone behind her make a sound of disbelief. Earth's axial tilt creates extreme seasonal variations, with temperatures ranging from far below freezing to hot enough to kill most known life forms, and humans have adapted to survive in all of these conditions. The holographic display changed, showing images of Earth's surface, erupting volcanoes, massive storms, earthquakes splitting the ground open, tsunamis crashing against coastlines. The planet is geologically active to a degree we have rarely seen in inhabited worlds, the scientist continued, its voice growing more strained with each word. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and violent weather events occur regularly, and humans have lived through all of them for hundreds of thousands of years. A military officer from the Kreth hegemony stood up from his seat. His scaled face twisted with what looked like anger or fear, or both. "Are you telling us," he demanded, "that these creatures come from a death world?" The Valanthi scientist nodded slowly. "By our classification standards, Earth exceeds every threshold for a Class 5 death world, which is the highest category we have." Silence fell over the chamber, heavy and complete. Kira looked around at the alien faces and saw expressions she had never seen before: shock, disbelief, and something that looked very much like terror. Visitharan stepped forward again, his thin legs clicking against the platform floor. "Let me explain what this means in practical terms," he said. "Every human who stands before you today has spent their entire life under gravity that would break the bones of most species in this chamber." He pointed at Marcus Webb, who sat beside Kira with his arms folded across his chest. "That soldier lifted debris that our rescue teams could not move because his muscles and bones developed under forces we cannot imagine, and he did it while barely trying." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Kira reached over to put a hand on his arm. "When humans first arrived on this station," Visitharan continued, "many of us thought they looked weak, with their soft skin and their lack of natural weapons. But we now understand that we were seeing them in an environment where their bodies barely need to work at all." He turned to face Kira directly, and his compound eyes seemed to glow in the chamber's light. "Ambassador Okonkwo, I must ask you a question, and I ask that you answer honestly." Kira stood and faced the delegate. "Ask your question. When you and your people walk through this station, when you lift objects and move through our corridors, are you using your full strength?" Kira thought about the question carefully before answering. "No," she said simply. "In the gravity of this station, we use perhaps 20% of our strength at most, and we have to be careful not to accidentally damage things or hurt people." A wave of sound rolled through the chamber, voices rising in alarm and disbelief. The Kreth military officer sat down heavily in his seat, his face pale beneath his scales. Visitharan raised his arms for silence, and slowly the chamber grew quiet again. "I think we all understand now why this assembly was necessary," he said. "We have welcomed a species into our community believing them to be fragile and weak. But the truth is very different." He looked at Kira one more time, and in his eyes she saw something that surprised her. Not fear, not anger, respect. "Humans are not fragile," he said to the assembly. "They are the survivors of a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they did not just survive, they conquered it. They built civilizations and created technology and reached out to the stars, all while carrying a weight on their shoulders that we cannot comprehend." He stepped back from the platform and bowed his head toward the human delegation. "I believe we owe our new allies an apology for underestimating them, and I believe we should all be very glad that they came to us as friends rather than enemies." The chamber was silent for a long moment. And then, slowly, one by one, the aliens began to rise from their seats, not in anger, not in fear. In acknowledgement of a truth they could no longer deny. Humanity was not what they had believed, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again. In the months that followed the Great Revelation, the galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. News about the humans spread like fire through dry grass, jumping from system to system, carried by traders and diplomats and ordinary citizens who could not stop talking about what they had learned. On 1,000 different worlds, beings of every shape and size watched recordings of the market collapse, of humans lifting impossible weights and saving lives with their bare hands, and they asked themselves the same question: how did we not know? The answers to that question varied depending on who was asking. Some species felt foolish for misjudging the humans so badly, while others felt afraid of what this new information might mean for the balance of power in the galaxy, and some, like the Kreth hegemony, felt something much worse. In the military headquarters of the hegemony, far from Valanthos Prime, General Cross stood before a strategic display that showed the positions of his battle fleets. For 3 years, he had been planning an expansion into council space, a series of carefully calculated conquests that would have made the hegemony the dominant power in this region of the galaxy. His plans had assumed that the new human species would be a minor obstacle at best, too weak and too few in number to make any real difference in a conflict. Now those plans lay in ruins. "Show me the data again," he ordered, and his aide activated the display. Images of humans filled the screen. Soldiers training on Earth, lifting weights that Kreth warriors could not dream of moving, running distances that would kill most species from exhaustion, fighting hand to hand with a speed and power that seemed almost supernatural. "Our intelligence division has confirmed the gravity figures," the aide said nervously. "Earth's gravity is more than twice our homeworld's, and humans spend their entire lives under that pressure." General Cross watched the images in silence, his clawed hands gripping the edge of the display console. "What would happen," he asked slowly, "if we fought them in standard galactic conditions?" The aide swallowed hard. "Our analysts believe that a single human soldier would be equivalent to roughly 5 to 7 of our best warriors in terms of strength and endurance, and that is a conservative estimate. And if we fought them on their own world?" "We would lose," the aide said simply. "The gravity alone would incapacitate our forces within hours, and that is assuming we could even land on the surface." General Cross was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and deactivated the display. "Recall the 3rd and 4th fleets from the border regions," he said. "We will pursue diplomatic solutions with the Council." On Valanthos Prime, Kira Okonkwo found herself dealing with a very different kind of challenge every day. Ambassadors from dozens of species requested meetings with her, offering trade agreements and military alliances and promises of eternal friendship. Species that had ignored humanity just weeks ago were now desperate to be their partners, but not everyone wanted to be friends. A faction within the Council, led by a species called the Morath, had begun spreading fear about the humans. The Morath were ancient and proud, and they did not like how quickly the balance of power was shifting. "These Death-World creatures should be contained," argued Councillor Veth of the Morath during one heated assembly meeting. "They are too dangerous to be allowed free movement through our space." "We have done nothing to threaten anyone," Kira responded calmly, standing at the speaker's platform with her hands clasped behind her back. "You have not threatened us yet," Councillor Veth hissed. "But what happens when you decide you want something we have? What happens when your population grows and you need more space? Your kind evolved as predators on a world that breeds monsters, and I do not believe you have truly left those instincts behind." Murmurs ran through the chamber, and Kira could see that some of the delegates were nodding in agreement. She took a deep breath and thought carefully about her response. "You are right that Earth made us strong," she said finally. "You are right that our world is harsh, and that we evolved to survive things that would destroy most species." The chamber grew quiet. aliens leaning forward to hear what she would say next. "But you are wrong about what that means," Kira continued. "Our world did not just teach us to be strong, it taught us to work together, because on Earth, no one survives alone." She gestured at her team, at Marcus and Dr. Chen and the others who had worked so hard to save lives during the collapse. "When the market fell, my people did not stop to ask which species the victims belonged to. They did not calculate whether helping would benefit humanity. They simply saw beings in pain, and they acted." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, filling the chamber with a conviction that seemed to push back against the fear and suspicion. "That is what Earth taught us, Counselor. That true strength is not about domination. It is about the choice to help those who cannot help themselves. And if you cannot understand that, then perhaps you do not understand us at all." The chamber was silent when she finished, and Counselor Veth had no response. Later that day, Kira walked through the residential district of the station, trying to clear her mind after the stressful meeting. She was surprised when she heard someone calling her name in a small, hesitant voice. She turned and saw a young Kaveth child standing in a doorway, clutching something in her feathered hands. The child was the same one Marcus had saved from the collapse, and Kira recognized her immediately. "Ambassador," the child said, her translator struggling with her youth-slurred words. "I have been looking for the human who saved me, but I do not know where he is." Kira knelt down to the child's level and smiled gently. "Sergeant Webb is in our quarters resting. He worked very hard that day, and he is still recovering." The child held out what she was carrying, and Kira saw that it was a torn piece of fabric, dark blue with silver trim. It was a piece of Marcus's uniform, probably torn off during the rescue. "I wanted to return this to him," the child said, "and I wanted to tell him something." "What did you want to tell him?" Kira asked. The child straightened her small body and lifted her chin with a determination that seemed almost comical in someone so young. "I wanted to tell him that when I grow up, I want to be strong like humans." Kira felt her eyes grow wet, and she had to blink several times before she could respond. "I think Marcus would like to hear that very much," she said. "Would you like me to take you to see him?" The child nodded eagerly, and Kira took her small, feathered hand and led her toward the human quarters. When they arrived, Marcus was sitting by the window, looking out at the stars, and he turned in surprise when Kira entered with the young alien. "She wanted to return something to you," Kira explained, and she stepped back to let the child approach. The Kaveth held out the torn piece of uniform, and Marcus took it with gentle hands. "Thank you," he said softly. "I was wondering where this went." "I kept it," the child admitted. "It made me feel safe, but my mother said I should give it back." Marcus looked at the fabric for a moment. Then he reached out and placed it back in the child's hands. "Keep it," he said. "It will remind you that you are stronger than you think." The child's eyes grew wide. "But I am not strong like you." Marcus smiled and knelt down to look her in the eyes. "Strength is not just about what you can lift, little one. It is about what you choose to carry, the burdens you take on for others, the courage to keep going when things are hard." He touched her chest gently, right where her heart would be. "You survived something terrible, and you are still here, still smiling, still hoping for the future. That is strength, and do not let anyone tell you different." The child threw her arms around him, and Marcus held her gently. Careful not to squeeze too hard, Kira watched them with tears running down her face. "This," she thought, "this is what we came here to show them. Not our muscles or our bones or our ability to survive a death world, but our hearts. Our capacity for kindness in a universe that often seems so cold. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest strength of all one standard year had passed since the humans first arrived at Valanthos Prime, and in that time, everything had changed." The great assembly chamber of the Galactic Council was filled to its absolute limit, with representatives from over 200 species crowding into seats designed to hold half that number. Those who could not find seats stood along the walls or floated near the ceiling, depending on their biology, and countless more watched through broadcast screens on worlds scattered across the galaxy. Everyone knew why they had gathered. Today, humanity would be formally elevated to full membership in the Galactic Council, a process that normally took decades but had been completed in just 12 months. Kira Okonkwo stood in the preparation room behind the main stage, adjusting her ceremonial robes and trying to calm the storm of nerves in her stomach. Marcus Webb stood beside her, wearing his dress uniform with all his medals displayed on his chest, and Dr. Chen was checking her notes for the speech she would never need to give because she had memorized every word. "Are you ready, Ambassador?" asked Visas Theron, appearing in the doorway with his forearms folded in what Kira had learned was a gesture of anticipation. "No," Kira admitted with a small laugh. "But I do not think anyone is ever truly ready for something like this." Vis Theron made a clicking sound that his translator interpreted as warm amusement. "I have found that the beings who do the greatest things are rarely the ones who feel prepared to do them." He stepped aside to let her pass, and Kira walked out onto the central platform of the assembly chamber with her team behind her. The noise that greeted her was overwhelming. Hundreds of voices raised in what might have been cheers or calls of welcome or simply expressions of excitement, a wall of sound that crashed over her like a wave. She stood at the speaker's podium and waited for the noise to fade, looking out at the sea of alien faces that stretched in every direction. A year ago, many of these beings had looked at her with pity or amusement, seeing only a soft and fragile creature from an unremarkable world. Now they looked at her with respect, with curiosity, and yes, some still looked with fear. But even the fear was mixed with something like admiration. When the chamber finally grew quiet, Kira began to speak. "1 year ago, my species took its first steps onto this station, strangers in a galaxy we did not understand. And I remember how you looked at us." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "You saw creatures without armor or claws, without natural weapons or defenses, and you thought we were weak. You thought our world must have been gentle to produce beings so soft." A ripple of uncomfortable movement passed through the crowd, aliens shifting in their seats as they remembered their own first impressions. "But now you know the truth," Kira continued. "You know that Earth is not a gentle world. You know that our planet tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, with its crushing gravity and its violent weather and its countless predators." Her voice grew stronger, filling every corner of the massive chamber. "And we survived, not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous, but because we learned to stand together, to carry each other when we could not walk alone, to build communities and civilizations that could withstand anything our world threw at us." She thought of all the history she carried with her, all the struggles and triumphs of her species. "Humanity has faced extinction more times than we can count. From ice ages that froze our world, from plagues that killed millions, from wars that we foolishly waged against ourselves. And every single time, we survived." She looked at Marcus and Dr. Chen and the rest of her team, these ordinary humans who had done extraordinary things simply by being who they were. "We survived because we refused to give up, because we kept reaching for something better, because we believed that tomorrow could be brighter than today if we were willing to fight for it." The chamber was utterly silent now, every being hanging on her words. "That is what we bring to this council," Kira said. "Not just our strength, though you have seen that we are strong. Not just our endurance, though you know that we can endure almost anything, but our hope." She spread her arms wide as if trying to embrace the entire galaxy. "We have looked up at the stars since we were children living in caves, dreaming of the day when we might reach out and touch them, and now that day has come, and we want to share that dream with all of you." Her voice softened, becoming almost intimate despite the vast audience. "We know that some of you are afraid of us, and I understand that fear because we have been afraid ourselves, afraid of our own capacity for violence, afraid of what we might become if we lost our way." She thought of the wars in human history, the terrible things her species had done to itself before they finally learned to live in peace. "But I promise you this. The same strength that lets us lift impossible weights also lets us carry the burdens of others. The same endurance that lets us survive death worlds also lets us never give up on those who need our help. And the same stubbornness that made us climb out of caves and reach for the stars will make us the most loyal friends you have ever known." She paused and looked directly into the broadcast cameras that were sending her image across the galaxy. "We are not conquerors, we are not tyrants, we are the children of a world that forged us in fire and taught us that the only way to survive was together." Kira straightened her back and lifted her chin. "Today, we join this council not as masters or servants, but as partners and friends, and I swear on my planet and my people that we will stand beside you through whatever challenges the universe sends our way." She stopped speaking, and for a long moment, silence filled the chamber. Then the Kaveth delegation rose to their feet, led by the healer who had witnessed Marcus holding up that pillar. Then the Valanthi rose, their silver skin shimmering in the chamber lights. One by one, every species in the assembly stood, even the Morath who had argued so strongly against the humans, even the Kreth who had once planned to conquer them. 200 species, standing together, acknowledging a truth they could no longer deny. Kira felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not try to hide them. Beside her, Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, and she could feel him shaking with emotion. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." Kira nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stare at this impossible moment that she would remember for the rest of her life. Later, when the ceremony was over and the delegates had returned to their own quarters, Kira stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Theron found her there, standing in silence with his 4 arms clasped behind his back. "That was a remarkable speech, Ambassador," he said. "Thank you," Kira replied. "I meant every word." "I know you did," the alien said. "That is what made it remarkable." They stood together for a while, watching the distant suns burn in the darkness. "I owe you an apology," Theron said finally. "When you first arrived, I thought your species was unfinished, incomplete somehow, and I was foolish and blind." Kira smiled and shook her head. "You saw what you expected to see. We all do that sometimes." "But you did not," Theron said. "You came into a galaxy that underestimated you at every turn, and instead of anger or resentment, you showed us kindness. You saved lives and asked for nothing in return, and I think that is the most human thing of all." Kira turned to look at the alien who had become something like a friend over the past year. "We learned a long time ago that the universe does not owe us anything," she said. "So we decided to become the beings we wished we had met when we were young and afraid." Outside the station, the stars burned on, eternal and uncaring. But in that moment, standing on the edge of infinity, Kira felt something she had never expected to feel so far from home. She felt like she belonged. The galaxy had looked at human softness and seen fragility. They had not understood that Earth did not create survivors by making them hard. It created survivors by breaking them again and again until only the ones who could put themselves back together remained. And those survivors, those stubborn and hopeful and impossibly strong beings, had finally found their place among the stars.